Okay,
Okay,
we are ready.
if we're ready, it's 6:39, Tuesday, April 7th. This is the regular meeting of the Cherry Hills Village City Council. We're live online by Zoom. So could I have a roll call of members, please, Laura?
Counselor Safavi,
Here.
Counselor Wheel,
Here.
Counselor Brown,
Here.
Counselor Gallagher,
Here.
Counselor Sheldon,
Here.
Counselor Blum.
Here.
Great, every council member is present. Thank you. I saw the audience participation. I didn't see any signups. Is that correct, Laura?
Correct. We do not have any signups.
Okay. And I take it none of our boards or commissions have asked to be heard?
Correct.
So we'll move to item 5, the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Well, I think there might be some council members who want to remove something.
Yes, Councilor Blum, I would like to remove items 5E and F.
Okay. Then I move to approve consent agenda items A, B, C, D, and G.
Second, Mike Gallagher.
We have a motion, a second, but we'll need to take a roll call on this. So Laura, when you're ready.
Yep. Counselor Safavi,
Yes.
Counselor Wheel,
Yes.
Counselor Brown,
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher,
Yes.
Counselor Sheldon,
Yes.
Counselor Blum.
Yes,
Okay, that passes. A, B, C, D, and G pass unanimously. So Councilor Blum, floor is yours.
okay, the question I had, and I had a discussion this afternoon with Jessica about where we stand financially with what's going on with the COVID-19. And the question it looks like, and is Jessica on the meeting?
Yes, I'm here.
So Jessica and I discussed, and maybe Jessica, you can discuss where you think we are, the discussion we had this afternoon about what the effect may be, because we don't know a lot of it yet, but what the effect may be on our budget with the COVID-19.
Sure. So as Councilor Blum said, he and I had a discussion this afternoon. We know we'll experience a loss in revenue, but at this point, we won't know the full impact probably until the end of May, now that the shelter-in-place order has been extended. The 4 line items that I'm expecting to see a loss in revenue due to the pandemic are sales tax, motor vehicle use tax, building permit fees, and municipal court fines. So those 4 items make up a combined total of 42% of the general fund revenue that we budgeted for 2020. If the city were to experience a 10% reduction in those 4 areas, it would equate to a loss in revenue of approximately $370,000, for example. So one option that we have discussed is to help offset the loss in revenue could be to delay the capital streets projects. The total amount we budgeted for the chip seal replacement is $600,000. So if necessary, council could authorize to transfer funds from the capital fund into the general fund if we need it.
So there are 2 projects, there's E and F. One project, what is the total expenditures for both projects?
So the chip seal replacement is $600,000. We budgeted $600,000 total. That includes the chip seal, the painting, and some maintenance. And then we also have a concrete replacement program, and we budgeted $85,000 for that one. So total would be $685,000 is what is budgeted in the capital fund at this point.
So both bids that the city received are below what was budgeted originally.
Correct.
Correct.
So between the 2, it's about $70,000 under. So my concern is, are these required now? Maybe we can hear from Jay as to the requirements, or if these things can be deferred, or do we have to make a decision tonight on these things?
We have a number of options on that. Our streets are in very good shape. We could defer these for a year and simply pick it up when we can afford to do it, or we could simply delay the approval of these and see what happens in the meantime and come back to them. The way the contract documents are written is we have 90 days to have council approve those contracts from the bid opening date. And those dates were
February 22nd, yeah.
February 26th for the concrete, March 13th for the chip. So we wouldn't have to make a decision until May 26th for the concrete and June 13th. Now, again, we could go longer than 90 days. The 90 days just gives the contractor, if we don't approve it within 90 days, they can pull their bid and then there's no penalty on the bid bond. So the 90 days is just when the bid bond runs out. We could still try to negotiate with those contractors to hold those prices until we have a better feeling about our financial situation later in the year.
So my question, I guess, for the mayor then, would these be appropriate items to table till the next council meeting? And I don't know when the next council meeting is scheduled.
Well, we'll have another council meeting this month, a 2-week regular council meeting. And then, of course, in May, the charter requires us to have one council meeting per month. So the schedule, the agenda next meeting is really light too. So we could take this up in the first meeting in May and still, as I understand, Jay, be able to make a decision then, or even the second meeting in May if we needed to.
Correct.
And it would just be a motion to continue action on those items.
So if that's the case, go ahead.
Al, hi, Dan Sheldon. Quick question, I guess, back to Jessica. Jessica, you're suggesting that 10% of the annual revenue comes from those 4 line items, or 40% of the revenue comes from those 4 line items, of which 10% of that 40% is 300 something thousand.
370. 370,000 exactly. The combined total for those 4 items is 42% of the general fund revenue.
Are you suggesting that some of those may be shut off entirely? I mean, we're still getting some permits.
No. Yes, we're not suggesting that at all. Municipal court fines have stayed on track. At this point, we've canceled the remaining court sessions for April. So what we've been doing in the meantime is offering pleas on the cases that we can. So we're collecting revenue. Eventually that'll catch up because the ticket issuance has slowed down. Building permits have stayed steady. They've gone down slightly, but they've stayed steady. It's really the unknown factor would be sales tax and motor vehicle use tax. It's hard to gauge how many people will be buying vehicles right now. And then sales tax, it's hard to gauge how many of those businesses are still actually providing limited services versus how many have shut down. We get a good number of vendors or self-collect and remit sales tax to the city. So those are sort of the unknown factors.
I agree with Al. I think it's wise for us to be very cautious right now, and if we can postpone, even if it's just for 60 or 90 days, postpone some of these projects. It's what I'm doing in my business. It's what I'm doing personally. I think it's the right thing for the city. I think every city and jurisdiction should be doing that right now, just tightening the belt right now with the unknowns.
Councilor Gallagher.
I suppose the question is, how far do you push it out? Do we go 60 days? Do we go right up to our second meeting in May where we're right under the deadline? Or I suppose we could evaluate it as things change, but I'd say at a minimum 60 days.
Mayor, if I could, this is City Manager. Knowing that if we want to postpone these, what we can do is postpone it to a date in May. And in the meantime, we can negotiate with our contractors and see if they'll hold the price for a later date. And then at that time, we can come back in May and say they'll hold it until August, and then we can hopefully award a project in August or sometime like in that timeframe.
That's a great suggestion. Councilor Brown?
I agree. Do we want a motion, or do we still have discussion? Is there anybody who still has?
I was going to ask Councilor Wheel if he had any thoughts as well.
No, I'm fine with the comments that have been made. I think we should postpone until we have some clarity about what the financial picture is.
Okay, and I assume the same, Councilor Savavi?
Yeah, I like what I heard. I think if we can give it about 60 days or so, by then we have a lot more clarity of what's happening. And then somewhere around that time, we should revisit it. But meanwhile, we can wait for Jay and our, city manager to also keep us up to date if, what's going on. So.
Okay,
Hey, Mayor.
well, I'll entertain a motion then. It would be a motion to continue these two consent agenda items to a later date, so that of the
Mayor, this is
Makes a
Councilor
motion.
Plum. I would go ahead and move that we table these to a date in May, an uncertain date, whether it's the first or second meeting, depending on what we find out. One comment I do have, Jessica said, I guess our income follows probably 30 days later. We may know a lot better by May where we stand on this thing. So I think it's wise to table it right now. So that would be my motion to table this now.
I'll second.
Okay, there's
Sorry,
a
who
motion.
seconded?
Mr. Randy.
Randy,
Randy
Randy.
seconded.
Yep.
There's a motion and second. Any further discussion or thoughts?
I have one further comment. This is Dan Sheldon. It may behoove us to actually let these contracts go all together. If you believe like me that pricing of this kind of infrastructure is going to go down as a result of this, we may not want to ask our contractors to hold the price, because next time we take it out to pricing in 30, 60, 90 days, it could be 10% less. Just an idea.
Well, I think that's a great point, Councilor, particularly with the price of oil and its factor in the asphalt, in the chip seal. Any other comments?
No, the only thing, this is Councilor Safavi. I actually, Dan read my mind. I fully agree with that. I think there's a very good possibility that we end up with better pricing at a later time anyway. So if we time this properly. So thank you. That's all.
Yeah, just as a word of caution also on that, and certainly we'll be talking to our contractor. And again, this is city manager. If everybody withholds contracts and they all release them at the same time, we could have an issue where prices go up. So it's always a little bit of a guessing game, just like stocks.
Yeah, I don't know how they bid it, but if they have a line item for the asphalt oil component, you can have some discussion.
Yep.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, we can call a vote. Laura?
Councilor Safavi?
Yes.
Councilor Wheel?
Yes.
Councilor Brown?
Yes.
Councilor Gallagher?
Yes.
Councilor Sheldon?
Yes.
Councilor Plum?
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes. It will be, the action on those two items, 5E and F, will be continued until May. Next item, unfinished business, item 7A, which is Council Bill 4, Series 2020, amending section 16410 of the municipal code concerning off-street parking requirements. This is on second and final reading. And is this Chris? Will you be presenting?
Yes, good evening, Mayor, members of council. And Laura, I cannot
your PowerPoint?
share. No, that's, oh, I see, you've got it up here. Well done, thank you. This is the second reading for the text amendment to the off-street parking requirement section of the code. As a refresher of what this is, the section in question, 16-4-10, is the lead-in section to the entire parking table that lists parking requirements for all land uses. The purpose of the text amendment is to end confusion regarding how to calculate parking requirements. The section in question is attempting to highlight different land uses, and instead of different parts or components of a single land use. And therefore, there are 2 suggested text amendments to clarify that intent for all of the land uses that would be impacted by this. Staff researched other jurisdictions, checked with the person who helped us, Todd Messenger, who helped us with the code modernization project, and looked at some of the existing churches and their parking usage, because they obviously, the places of assembly would be one of the key elements affected by this. They would not be the only ones, but this would clarify the practice that would already be used by staff in calculating parking requirements for a new site plan. So at the first reading, the vote was 4-2 in favor of approving, and the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval unanimously. So staff is available for any questions you may have. And any other, this is an interesting format, so if there's additional information we need, just let me know and we'll do our best to try and get it for you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kramer. Appreciate it. Councilor Blum.
No comment.
Councilor Sheldon.
Yeah, so as you all may recall, I voted no on this last time around at first reading. I'm going to be voting no again on it today, and I just would like to I'd like to address the 3 reasons why I think that this is a foolish thing to do. But before I get into that, I want to suggest that if for any reason we think that this should be something done in person, better communicated in person, giving the public an opportunity, especially at a second reading, a public hearing. If I don't believe.
Sorry, just to clarify, it's not a public hearing. Just sorry to interrupt. It's not a public hearing.
Thank you, Laura. And I see Steve Ferris has joined in, because that's good. I wasn't sure if he was on or not. Now I just see him for the first time. I don't know if this makes any sense for us to table it all, but I think that there's discussion that needs to have on this matter. And if nobody's interested in tabling the issue, then I will get into my 3 issues with the with this bill.
I guess we can, maybe this is a question for Chris, whether what is there an urgency in doing this, or is it something that we can move? It's my, and I'll be frankly, when I'm looking at the agendas for these meetings that we're doing online, I'm pushing important things that don't need to be decided now off in the future. So it just is a matter of policy. I'd prefer in-person meetings if we're going to decide important things. I agree with Councilor Sheldon's, I think, the implicit message, idea there. So Mr. Kramer, is what's the, can you speak to the urgency or the timing of this?
From a city perspective, there's no urgency to speak of. Obviously, this text amendment came about organically through the process of the code modernization effort. And this was one of the follow-ups to that process. This will not be the only follow-up to that code modernization effort. There were all sorts of interesting impacts and outcomes of that code modernization that were unintended in some ways and just unforeseen in others. So we will probably continue to do these. The CIS was the second reading, and therefore we thought it might, and it was not required to have a public hearing, and so therefore we thought it might work for this meeting format. However, if council wants to table that, from a city perspective, we have nothing urgent or pending on that would require this clarification.
So if I could,
Councilor
my
Sheldon,
opinion is, I know when we met last, this was not approved. This did not have unanimous support on first reading. And I think just to be respectful and make sure all of the various opinions are heard and all of the various aspects are considered, I would be in favor of tabling it for consideration at a later date.
Okay. Councilor Gallagher.
I have absolutely no problem pushing it on to a later date, because rarely do we have disagreements on these votes, and here it makes sense to I think push it off so we can do it in a public forum.
Counselor Wheel?
I guess I'd ask Steve Ferris whether he has any perspective from the applicant's view.
Thanks. I raised
Because
my hand.
it's clear to me the city doesn't have a time issue, but I don't know about the applicant.
Just
Or
to
not
clarify, the city
applicant, but,
attorney
you know,
Guckenberger, oh, sorry, he's
Yeah.
not an applicant. This is a
Yeah,
legislative
I
change.
used the wrong term.
Right.
Used the wrong term. Yeah, more from First Church and their perspective. Do we have any information?
Mr. Ferris?
Well,
you
if we
have a
don't, then I don't have a problem with tabling it.
I'd be happy to talk. I've raised my hand. If Steve
Yeah,
Ferris.
go ahead, Steve.
Oh, Steve, okay, there we go.
With respect to your need to or desire to table, I can understand that. I can tell you that from our perspective, we are prepping to submit our application as we've discussed with you in the future for amending the major site plan. And our application does rely upon and anticipates at least some clarity on what the regulations are going to say about parking. Tabling it creates huge ambiguity. It means we present two scenarios and two different calculations of what is going on, and we don't understand, and that makes it more complex for everyone to follow along. It would be very beneficial if we had the additional, at least clarity of what you're doing with this code amendment prior to our application, which we're aiming to submit in early May.
Well, this is Dan Sheldon. If you were planning on submitting in early May, I do believe that it takes our staff some time to get applications reviewed and get them set for any kind of hearings. They've got to go to Planning Commission first, I believe, for this type of an application, and then to City Council. I'd like to think that something can be resolved by then in an in-person meeting of council, but that is completely out of all of our hands as to when we're able to meet again. I would further suggest that this is an inconvenient time for all of us on many different fronts. And if it does cause an applicant to have to get postponed by a bit, that may be one of the unfortunate repercussions of COVID-19. Alternatively, I guess, as I discussed, I'm happy to get into it. I do believe that it warrants face-to-face, in-person conversation. And I think that it would be, I personally would like to see it get tabled till our first, at the very earliest, our first in-person meeting where we can have a more clear dialogue with each other, whereby there's nothing misconstrued, left unsaid, and nobody looking at their watch wondering what time they need to be at the next Zoom call. That'd be my preference.
Councilor Savavi, if you have your thoughts.
Yes, look, I mean, I personally would have liked to go ahead and move on and pass this and be done. Last time the votes were 4-2. We've had this discussion on this topic quite a bit. With that being said, I want to be respectful of Council Sheldon, and if he has more information that he likes to discuss in person, I would respect that, and I'm okay with postponing it. But I do want to at the same time state my position that again, as last time it was yes, and still remained yes. With that being said, I'm okay with postponing it.
Okay, it sounds like we have a direction from the council. What's a pleasure of council? Is there a motion? Someone like to make a motion? Or Councilor Sheldon, would you like to make a motion?
I would move that we table item 7A until such time as our first, at the earliest, our first available in-person meeting.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item 7 on this motion? Hearing none, Laura, could we have a roll call?
Counselor Savavi,
Yes.
Counselor Wheel,
No.
Counselor Brown,
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher,
Yes.
Counselor Sheldon,
Yes.
Counselor Blum.
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes. It's actually a motion to continue this matter until our first, we can reconvene in person at City Hall. That's
Mayor,
passed.
real quick, just to clarify, one additional thing moving forward on this. When we do have the follow-up discussion, I mentioned earlier, it's staff's interpretation to calculate parking based on the reading that is clarified through the amendment. If the intent is to not have that, if the legislative intent of City Council is to not calculate it that way, the outcome of the next discussion could be a need to clarify the code the other direction, so to speak. So I may start working on both options to have available for that conversation.
Director Kramer, I'm sorry to ask you to do this. This is Dan Sheldon. I had a phone ringing in the background and I missed the first 10 seconds of that. And I'm sorry, I did not really understand what you just suggested. Could you restate that?
Yeah, yes. Just suggesting that currently I would interpret if an application were to come in, I would interpret the code using the language as I read it today, which would be similar to what the proposal is before you. If the legislative intent by all of City Council is to not calculate it in that way that this amendment was attempting to clarify, then we probably need to have different language to amend to make it more clear to calculate it the other way. And so I will work in the meantime on having that alternative or that option for council to consider as well. The current reading is ambiguous either way, and so we need to clarify it one way or the other.
Chris, Mike Gallagher, question for you. Help us understand how you came to that thinking that in your interpretation.
Sure. There are, when you look at the whole parking table, there are some uses that have requirements based on square footage. There are some uses that have parking requirements based on adding together different elements of a land use. For example, private clubs, the school daycare land use, the high school land use, they basically all add together different parts of a single use to arrive at a grand total of parking spaces required. The last category that we have are a few uses that really only talk about one aspect of a given use and base the calculation, the parking requirement on that aspect of it. It doesn't add together various components of a specific use. So categories or uses that fall in that category include places of assembly, fueling station, which is two spaces for every fueling station, vehicle wash use. Those are different categories. When we did the research of the other jurisdictions and spoke with Todd Messenger, our code expert, if you will, and based on my experience at looking at this, if the code wants us to add together the various elements, it would lay it out that way, like it does for private clubs, schools, high schools, etc. If it wants you to use one aspect of it as the baseline for that, it will say it that way also, which is what the current code does. What the section 16-4-10 does is, according to, I think Kathy, Todd, and I all felt that this was really a language that is best, was maybe a holdover or something that our code adopted from some other codes that really is not very much present in Cherry Hills Village. Especially, I think it's more appropriate for commercial uses. And so our hope was to clarify that section so that it makes those various types of calculation methods easier to interpret. If we wanted to not have it be that way, we would probably need to break out the church parking requirement to be more like schools, high schools, and private clubs, which will, I'll need to do some research to figure out how we can best calculate that.
Thank you.
It's certainly, it's an acceptable, obviously it's an acceptable way to calculate parking because we do it. We do it in our code. We do it with private clubs, schools, and high schools. It's just not how, I think we would have read it until now. But make no mistake, if the legislative intent is to not have it be that way, I'd like to be prepared to meet your intent.
Thank you.
I think at the end of the day, we'll be prepared either way. So
yes,
I think we've got direction from council and ready to move.
Okay, I'll pass over no new business because there is none that I know about. And proceed on to reports. I'll just have a brief report. I wanted to just note the passing of Candy Gray, a longtime village resident and a friend of mine too. And she was member of the supporter of the Pony Club and was touched many in our community and has many friends. And I think she's also, a long time. I think she's probably lived here for more than 50 years, maybe more than 60 years. I think in the early 60s she moved in. She passed on Sunday at home, surrounded by family. So it was what she wanted. So it was actually okay in that sense. But it is been complicated. Her funeral has been complicated, of course, by the virus, and memorial will be sometime later. So I wanted to mention her and to remember her and as a real asset and personal friend in this community. Since the last meeting, haven't had many in-person meetings, of course, with anybody. All of those have been canceled, and but I have been on a lot of calls with the Metro Mayor's Caucus and the Colorado Municipal League and the Arapahoe County Commissioners, and also Mayor Hancock is running has run a virtual meetings, Zoom meetings with mayors, and all the discussions about coronavirus, and a lot of it is on the implementation of the governor's order and the stay-at-home order and how you read that and what's going on. And of course, there's a lot of discussion there about economic helping businesses apply to the federal government for the assistance funds that are available and how to do that. We've had conversations with the Chamber of Commerce, who is actually, I think, probably the best resource I've heard. So if you have constituents who have that issue, businesses outside of the village, the Chamber of Commerce is really on top of it, and I thought was very helpful. And that's really it for me in my comments. So other reports from council members, Councilmember Blum?
Just two things. One is the Metroplex was implemented on March 26th. And I don't know if you noticed, but I have not seen any traffic over my house ever since they implemented that. The only other thing is that I would like to say everybody to have a happy Easter and happy Passover. Let's all stay healthy for the next meeting. Go ahead.
Councilmember Sheldon.
No report. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Gallagher.
I'd just like to report that the west side, without its sidewalks, we have people walking all over the place. We have our own residents, we have Englewood residents, and it's really been fun to see the increase in walking activity and families out together. So maybe there's a silver lining in this experience. End of report.
Councilmember Brown.
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Wheel.
There was a working session early in the first of the month, Dr. Cog, which talked about the planning, both Vision Zero and the transportation planning. Early stages, they're doing scenarios. the final report for the transportation plan is, it's first quarter of 2021. So I'll keep you informed as that develops. Certainly echo Mike's comments about all kinds of people walking around the neighborhood. It's really pretty great. A lot of chance to chat with folks and socialize, meet people I didn't know before, which is good. And as well echo Al's comments about, stay healthy. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilor Safavi.
I think I echo what everybody else said, that, my hats off and kudos to all the folks in the past several decades that have preserved these trails, because I think we're all appreciating these now. So, after being stuck at home for so many hours, going for a walk around these trails, it's just amazing. So that's all. Thank you.
Great. City Manager Thorson.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. This is certainly a strange way to be meeting, but as a administrator of your government, we've been learning a lot of how to use these things and learning new terminology like Zoom bombers and others. I just, first of all, just want to thank the staff for putting all this together, and they've done a miraculous job of getting to know all the details of how to put things on an agenda and get it so that anybody who views this can see it and watch it and hopefully understand that why we're doing it. With the COVID-19, I'm going to have each of the department heads give a little update from their perspective on what they are doing. And then I'll just wrap up after that's done. So I'm going to hand it off to Police Chief Michelle Tobria to start us off.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Through the City Manager's Friday reports, you've seen a few things we've done with regard to temporary directives, which assist the officers with how to go and conduct basically day-to-day activities. We have been in constant contact with our area command organization. As you are aware, we are in the Central Division, which includes Centennial, Greenwood Village, Glendale, Foxfield, and then unincorporated Arapahoe County. We have briefings every morning at 9:30 to give updates about what's going on throughout the county, and different things that are happening. We, with regard to those directives, they include how we deal with minor crime and how we will respond to everything else. We really have been, I'm really very proud of the police department. Everybody's doing a great job. We are trying to make sure that we keep our traveling motorists safe. I'm sure you've seen in the news how some folks are taking advantage of not very much traffic being out there, and some of the speeds are a little bit ridiculous. We have been writing a few of those types of tickets for 75, 80 miles an hour, whether it be on Bellevue University or Hamden. So we are trying to stay on top of that as much as we can so that we don't have, horrific accidents, which could cause all kinds of problems. We have put into place some things should things south or wrong with regard to canceling PTO time. We also have a 12-hour schedule in place should we need to go into something like that, and that will work in conjunction with the rest of our division. Certain supplies, we've been able to secure some from the Emergency Operations Center. Everyone has been issued some protective glasses. We do have some masks out and available to the staff. So right now, we're just in kind of a holding pattern to see what goes on and what happens. I will report to you that I absolutely agree with the council when it says it's great to see a lot of people out on the trails. That is an interesting thing, though, sometimes, in that I have received two, I wouldn't really necessarily even call them complaints, but concerns from a couple of people that live in Cherry Hills Village about the usage on the trails, in that people are not maintaining social distancing very well. My officers have been patrolling the trails, the canal in particular, the High Line, and basically just warning folks, just be careful of your spacing, things like that. And then this last weekend, traffic at trailheads got a little bit tough, and unfortunately we had to issue a few parking summonses, but we are staying abreast of it. Most people, my officers report, are very happy to see the officers on the trails, a lot of waves, a lot of goodwill. So I would tell you that I think things are going well right now. Unless there's any other particular questions you may have, that's all I would have for tonight.
Thank you, Chief. Director Goldie.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. A few things we've done in Public Works. We have gone to a 6-day work week so we can stretch our staff out, make sure that each staff member has their own vehicle. We are spending a lot of time cleaning those vehicles as we switch personnel on the different days, as well as all of the facilities. We are working on different projects than we normally would. Most of our projects, especially with the streets crew, social distancing is hard to do when you're fixing roads and paving and those type of things. So we do have a lot of small projects that have been building up over the years that we are catching up on. You will see more presence of the park staff, especially on the High Line. We've doubled up our trash pickup because of the use. We still don't have enough staff to walk down every trail every day, so we're encouraging anyone that's out there to take a trash bag with you and help us out, because we cannot get to each of those trails every day, and there is a lot of use out there, which is great. So we are, trying to keep staff safe, as well as keep the public safe too at the same time. That's all I have.
Jay, this is Katie. As far as we know, is the recycling day that's normally in May still being scheduled, or have you already considered canceling that?
We are working on that right now. I talked to my staff about that today. We are probably going to have to cancel that and maybe the car show at this time, and reschedule those for a later date or next year. But we should know here in the next week if we can get those together or not. And again, it all depends on how long we have to self-isolate and stay home too.
Director Goldie, could you give council an update on the Hamden underpass, Highline Canal underpass? So construction is not yet started on that. Denver told me that they expect to start that in May. They do have a few of the utility companies. XL is out there right now, and Comcast will be following up, that are moving utilities prior to that project starting. We hope to have a pre-construction meeting with Denver and the contractor in early May, and keep that one moving forward. And we will be ready here in the next few weeks to, we'll be at 100% drawings for the trail and pedestrian overpass on our side, so we can get that all lined up and bid out. So as soon as the underpass is done, we can go in and finish that connection. Thank you.
This is Randy. Jay, there was a request to CDOT for some do not block X's in a couple of locations. Do you have any update on where CDOT is and where that dialogue is?
We submitted those requests to CDOT about 3 weeks ago. They did confirm that they got those requests, and we have not heard back on the status of where those are for approval yet. And we did also bid those out, so we have the costs for the homeowners if they want to move forward, if CDOT approves those. And I don't see a problem with CDOT approving those. It's just going through their process takes some time.
Thanks.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'll have Director Kramer give an update.
Yes, good evening. I think as you are hearing from everyone tonight, overall, our goal is to try and provide every service that we can, while at the same time balancing that with the safety of our residents and our staff. The way that plays out in specific terms, building permits, we are still able to process building permits electronically. That's the intake, payment, the review, approval, and the issuance of COs. Inspections are a little tricky, only that there's some surrounding jurisdictions that are not doing interior inspections. We are, in working with Colorado Code, we are still doing interior inspections. We are giving the inspector the ability to request the interior space, either a portion or all of it, to be vacated of folks to protect both sides. So far, that has been great, and I think most people with permits have been very appreciative of that, so they have been more than willing to comply. So building permits are still all systems go. Land use cases, we are still able to accept and review all land use cases. Those are things like site plans, floodplain permits, subdivisions. So those are all still moving forward. We only have one active right now, and it is not necessarily close to being ready for any kind of public hearing at the current time. For the master plan, we're going to still continue to try and do as much work as we can with the master plan, knowing that it's such an important document and it's critical that it really be built by our residents. And so we are going to have the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting next week for the express purpose of creating and appointing the members of the Citizens Advisory Task Force. That is primarily to allow them to get up to speed and start doing some homework. But having a Zoom meeting like this with that large of a group might prove to be pretty challenging. So we're going to do everything we can with the master plan, knowing that in-person town hall meetings are not going to be possible, and knowing that Citizens Advisory Task Force may not be possible. We're still going to try and do as much research, demographic analysis, maybe start working on possible survey questions, knowing that we're going to do as much as we can. As I mentioned, the planning and zoning is scheduled for next week. We're hoping to get the packet out on that tomorrow. Finally, code enforcement. We are still responding to complaints for code enforcement, either through the hotline or the code enforcement email address. We will return all those calls and do site inspections any day of the week, Monday through Friday. If there's emergencies on the weekend, we will also do inspections on those. Stormwater inspections are still scheduled, and permitted stormwater inspections are all still occurring. And construction site inspections are also still occurring for code issues such as vehicle tracking, et cetera. So again, we are trying to do everything we can, knowing that there are a couple of real world impacts, but I think the staff, my staff, Ethan and Tim, have done a great job of trying to keep our residents in mind to provide as many services as they can.
Hi, this is Randy. Chris, I just wanted to check, are you in touch with the representatives so that they've got a sense of coming attractions, what the events are and the timing? Or should we be doing
the representatives of which organizations?
We came up with a list of the community advisory team and collectively. And I just wanted to be sure they were in the information loop, or if I'm supposed to be talking to them, I need to take some action.
No, we've got an email all teed up and ready to go. As soon as the Planning and Zoning Commission establishes the CAT and gets that vote on the roster, first thing the following morning, we'll be sitting it out with welcoming them, an overview about the process, and again, some initial steps on some homework they can do. It's all scheduled to go the next morning.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, was planning and zoning, were they able to interview candidates before all of this, or did they do it via Zoom, or did it before?
No. They did it via conference call.
Okay.
And so 9 applications came in, and they were able to pick the final 4. And so quality candidates, by the way. The final roster of the Citizens Advisory Task Force is going to be an impressive group, to say the least.
Right.
Okay, Director Sager.
Thank you. I just have a brief report. Good evening again. The Finance Administration and Municipal Court departments have been able to perform all of their regular duties. We have all desk phones forwarded to cell phones, and it's our hope, actually, that residents aren't even aware that we've been working remotely because they're getting the same level of service that we've always provided. As I reported in the Friday update, we've implemented some measures to assist with the loss of revenue. All non-essential expenditures have been delayed until further notice. We've also delayed hiring some of the seasonal staff and replacing a full-time position until the shelter-in-place orders lifted. We're going to delay watering of our parks, which we would normally start in April, but we've pushed back to May. And I've begun tracking the COVID-19 related expenditures in preparation for potential reimbursement if that's something we're able to do. I'd like to second what Jim said and say thank you to Laura and Emily for getting us up and running on Zoom. They've spent a lot of time tweaking the procedures to make sure the virtual meetings run without any hiccups, and they've done a great job doing that. Catherine has been monitoring all COVID-related updates to ensure the city's complying with the FMLA regulations that have been put into place, so we've got some procedures there. And staff has been posting daily updates related to COVID-19 and city services on the city's website, through the Notify Me service, on our Facebook page, and our Nextdoor page. We'll continue to send the daily updates until the shelter-in-place is lifted. And finally, Councilor Gallagher and I held our monthly Village Crier meeting remotely yesterday. So far, the graphic artist and printer for the crier haven't had to close, so the May issue should be designed, printed, and mailed without any delays.
Great. As far as a kind of a wrap up for me is, I'd like to just say that having a small staff is kind of neat because you can be pretty nimble and pretty quick at doing things. And we quickly got everybody onto Team Viewer so they could work at home. We jumped onto Zoom and went through a lot of training to get this where we are tonight. From my perspective, I think Jessica is correct that we try not to, even though City Hall may be physically closed, the PD is still open. And hopefully our residents, when they call, they get phone calls back from all of the staff or emails. And so we're, as far as I can tell, we're not missing a beat from where we were a couple of months ago. And that's a credit to not only the staff, but council in helping drive a product that hopefully is unnoticeable to the public. I will say that between the building and safety, the finance, the public works, our PD department, even our courts, we're making tons of calls to individuals with tickets and getting them lined up. And all of our administrative staff, even though we may be working in and out of the office, but mostly from home, have done a fantastic job. And our other 2 projects we have are the John Meade Park, and it's starting to actually really look good. They're putting the wood on the boardwalk, and it looks fantastic. And the signals over at Glenmore and Bellevue are still progressing, and hopefully within the next 2 weeks, I'll have mast arms going up, and we'll see maybe some turning on of those signals pretty shortly. So I know Councilmember Blum is happy to hear that. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. Dan Shelton. Did anyone want to see what I looked like with hair?
Oh. Wow.
Excellent.
Sorry about that. I had to add some lightness to this. Okay. That's all.
All right. City Attorney.
I'll be brief. I do want to start out with saying, as a contractor here for you, I can attest that all of your staff, working with them has been seamless. We've been working a lot. I've worked a lot with Catherine Ducharme on that, the FFCRA, which provides the paid sick leave and the extended FMLA leave, to be sure that compliance with that new federal law and Department of Labor regulations is ready to go. A side note on that, it provides reimbursement to employers if they have to grant those leaves, but excludes local governments from that reimbursement via payroll tax credits. And the National League of Cities has specifically written to Congress to request that that be amended in the next package that is considered. And then they've asked for a couple other things that affect local governments, including moratoria on shot clocks. So watch for that, just trying to look down the road. You may have also heard that the General Assembly of Colorado recessed on March 14th, and there was actually a Supreme Court case to address whether that recess was constitutional. That was deemed thus constitutional by a 4-3 vote of the Colorado Supreme Court. So that's just a little nugget of information. That's all I have. But I do want to wish everyone continued health and safety.
Yes, all right. Good health to everyone. Unless there's anything more, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion. Thank you all for getting online, and who's ever watching from logging in. We appreciate it, and take care.
Bye-bye.
So long.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.